They thought my seat was a joke. My in-laws whispered loud enough for the whole boarding line to hear, but they didn't know who I was about to meet. Someone who would change the entire flight. The morning air in New York was brisk, a chill that cut through even the glass walls of the JFK terminal. I clutched my boarding pass, printed in bold, Economy, row 28. My in-laws, Richard and Patricia, had been invited by my wife to join us on this trip to San Francisco. For them, flying was a matter of prestige, a silent contest of who deserved more space, more status, more attention. Row 28? Patricia's laugh slipped sharp like glass. "Oh dear, that's practically luggage." She tilted her head toward Richard, who smirked and nodded as if they had discovered a family secret worth mocking. I swallowed hard. "It's just a seat," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We'll all get there at the same time." But my words didn't matter. Their whispers were loud enough to echo down the gate, and I could feel eyes turn toward me. Passengers in suits adjusted their ties, mothers hugged their children closer, and for a moment, I felt like the smallest person in the terminal. The announcement for boarding came, slicing the air with its mechanical tone. Groups were called, and of course, Richard and Patricia strutted forward with their priority boarding. My wife hesitated between us, guilt painted across her face, but eventually followed her parents. I waited, boarding pass in hand, until row 28 was called. Inside the plane, the air smelled of recycled coffee and faint perfume. I slid into my seat, the window smudged with fingerprints from previous travelers, the aisle filled with chatter and the rolling of carry-on. Richard and Patricia passed by, seated several rows ahead. Richard leaned back, just enough to make sure his voice reached me. "Comfortable back there?" I forced a smile, but inside, every word cut deeper. Yet fate has a strange way of playing with timing. A man in a dark suit stopped near my row, scanning the cabin. His presence carried weight, as if he belonged not to the crowd, but above it. He turned, locked eyes with me, and for the first time that morning, I wasn't invisible. What I didn't know was that this man wasn't just another passenger. He was the CEO of one of the biggest companies in America, and soon he'd be sitting right beside me. The man in the dark suit slid his carry-on into the overhead bin with an economy of motion that made space appear where there wasn't any. He glanced at my armrest, then at the empty middle seat, then back to me. "Mind if I take the aisle?" he asked, voice calm, eyes alert. "Of course," I said, lifting my elbow. He settled in, buckled up, and offered a quick nod, as if to say we were now co-pilots of the same small piece of sky. Engines hummed beneath the floor. Flight attendants performed the safety demo with choreography that felt both rehearsed and urgent. From several rows ahead, I recognized Patricia's profile, chin lifted, lips pursed, while Richard adjusted his recline 2 clicks farther than politeness allowed. My wife glanced back once, worry tugging at her expression, then turned forward as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Takeoff gathered like a decision. The runway flashed by, New York's gray morning thinned to a white smear across the window. When we pierced the clouds, the cabin's tension loosened a notch. The man beside me powered down his phone, then pulled out a thin folder and a pen with a nickel clip. No logo on the folder, no brand on the pen. But in the thinness of the paper and the practiced way he scanned bullet points, I read the same thing I'd seen 100 times in client meeting. A mind that planned 3 steps ahead and waited for everyone else to catch up. I kept my eyes on the wing, not wanting to intrude. He must have sensed it. "Long day?" he asked. "About to be," I said. "I'm headed to a conference in San Francisco. Not speaking, just trying to keep something alive." He smiled without condescension. "That sounds like speaking, minus the podium." "It's a prototype," I said, then immediately wished I'd said nothing. But his attention didn't flinch. "A scheduling tool for distributed team. It balances human constraints with airline reliability data. Cuts churn in field service crews." He tapped his pen lightly. "Predictive scheduling that respects the person, not just the ticket." The phrase startled me. Exactly. The drink cart rattled close. He ordered coffee, black. I asked for water, needing time to corral my pulse. When the attendant moved on, he opened the folder just enough for me to see a page titled Westward Ops, On-Time Turnaround. Margins ringed with annotation, arrows, question mark. May I ask, he said, how you trained the model on airline reliability? That data rarely lives in one house. Public DOT data sets, I said, but they're lagging indicators. So I pair them with near real-time signals, matter weather, gate reassignments, late inbound patterns, crew legality windows. Then I put a human override on top, because the edge cases will eat you alive if you pretend they don't exist. He looked at me fully now, curious rather than skeptical. And you do this alone? I did, I said. Now it's me and a friend who believes in eating ramen for 2 more months. He laughed, a quick, honest sound, the ancient venture diet. I tried to laugh back, but the thought of Richard's earlier question, comfortable back there, bruised the moment. Maybe the man saw that, because he changed angles. What would success look like for you? He asked. Not a headline, I said. A contract. One that lets my wife stop apologizing to her parents for me. He studied the answer like it had come from a whiteboard instead of my chest. We flew in a pocket of quiet, wings shimmering, cabin lights low, the murmur of strangers becoming background music. Would you show me the interface? He asked, gentle, as if he were requesting a song in a room where music had already begun. I hesitated. Airline mode was on, but the app's offline demo could run. I opened my laptop like a secret and angled it so he could see. The dashboard came alive. City pairs, heat maps, a slider for crew fatigue probability that changed the overnight plans like a tide. He leaned in. Move the slider to the right. I did. Assignments rebalanced. One team stayed grounded instead of catching the red eye. A tooltip surfaced. Protect weekend. Recover Monday with spare lift from LAX short haul. He said nothing for several seconds. The cabin announced mild turbulence. Cups shivered. The seatbelt sign pinged. I closed the lid halfway, afraid of making a scene. Leave it open, he said. This is considerate. Software usually punishes the human. That's the point, I said, more fiercely than I meant. People aren't buffers. We floated through a bump that felt like a thought being revised. He glanced toward the front, where first class hid behind its curtain. A flight attendant paused to check on an elderly passenger, hand on the seat back, eyes kind. San Francisco is a hard town on dreamers, he said, almost to himself. I don't need it to love me, I answered. I need it to listen for 10 minutes. That, he said, I can promise. A shadow crossed his face, not darker, but deeper. As if he had chosen a direction. He extended a hand, and in that moment, I realized why the crew had given him that extra beat of attention when he boarded. Why another attendant had nodded when he passed. It wasn't his suit. It was the way space rearranged around his decision. I'm Michael Hart, he said, CEO at Atlas Dynamics. The name landed softly, then detonated. Atlas, the logistics giant whose trucks I'd tracked since college. The company whose internal schedules throbbed like the pulse of a continent. My breath caught. In row 28, next to the smudged window, with my in-laws somewhere ahead rehearsing a lifetime of superiority, the man I'd silently hoped to pitch to, one day, in a lobby I didn't have access to, was sitting at my elbow, drinking black coffee from a paper cup. I'm Daniel, I managed. Daniel Reed. Michael's handshake was dry, steady. He didn't squeeze too hard. He didn't need to. Daniel, he said, when we land, can you spare those 10 minutes? I thought of Patricia's laugh, Richard's smirk, my wife's small, brave glance back during boarding. Yes, I said, voice level. I've been saving them. Michael smiled, then reached for the call button, not to summon service, but to ask the attendant for a blank note card. When it arrived, he wrote a number, then the name of a cafe in Soma, then a time that would cut close to baggage claim but not miss it. He slid the card into my palm, anchoring it with a fingertip. Don't be late, he said, but there was no threat in it, only respect. For the first time since the gate, the plane felt big enough for me. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers shuffled for restrooms, earbuds, or stretches in the aisle. I stayed still, staring at the note card burning in my pocket like a live wire. Michael leaned back, closing his folder. Tell me, Daniel, he said, how do you handle people who don't believe in you? I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Richard's voice drifted from the row ahead, loud enough to carry, as always. Imagine sitting in coach when you could be up here. Some people just don't value comfort. Or maybe they can't afford it. Patricia chuckled, the kind of laugh that was designed to be overheard. The words struck like stone. I felt my shoulders tense, blood rushing to my ears. Michael's eyes followed the sound, then came back to me. He didn't smirk, didn't pity. He simply asked, "Them?" I nodded, throat tight. The attendant passed with snacks. Richard raised his hand. "We'll take 2 wines." Then, as if to twist the knife, he turned toward my wife. "Maybe next time he can upgrade us all, if his little projects work out." I caught my wife's face, flushed, lips pressed thin. She whispered something I couldn't hear, but Richard only laughed louder. Michael shifted in his seat, straightened his tie, and pressed the call button. The same attendant returned. He spoke softly, but with authority that carried. "Would you mind delivering this?" He held up his business card, writing something quickly on the back. The attendant nodded, curious, and walked the card up to Richard. From where I sat, I saw Richard's smirk fade as he flipped it over. Patricia leaned in, eyes narrowing. Then both froze. Michael didn't even glance forward. Instead, he turned to me, his voice just loud enough for the rows around to hear. "You said 10 minutes in San Francisco. I'll give you 20. Your model deserves that." A hush fell in our section. Heads turned, whispers sparked. I could feel my in-laws shrinking into their seats, realizing too late who sat beside me. For the first time, the balance shifted. I wasn't the man in row 28 anymore. I was the man who had been seen. I exhaled, pulse steadying, and Michael tapped the armrest lightly. "Now," he said, "show me the fatigue slider again." The laptop opened. The turbulence outside no longer mattered. Inside, something larger had just taken off. The plane jolted, trays rattled, and an overhead bin clicked half open before a flight attendant rushed to slam it shut. Gasps rippled through the cabin, then dissolved into awkward chuckle as the turbulence smoothed. But inside me, nothing was calm. Richard hadn't turned around once since reading Michael's card. Patricia sat stiff, eyes fixed forward as if the seatback screen could rescue her pride. My wife leaned sideways, meeting my gaze over the row. For the first time in years, her eyes weren't apologizing. They were shining. Michael sipped his coffee without hurry. "Turbulence shows character," he said quietly, as if noting the weather. "Some hold steady, some expose themselves." I thought of the dozens of dinners where Richard cut me down with casual jokes, of Patricia's sighs when I mentioned another late-night coding. In those moments, I had always swallowed my defense, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. Now, with row 28 trembling under the weight of jet engines and unseen winds, I wondered if silence had only sharpened their knives. Michael tapped the laptop. "Walk me through a live scenario." I adjusted the demo. A flight delayed by weather in Denver. Crews stretched thin, passengers stranded. My model rebalanced connection, protecting the crew's legal hours and shifting short-haul support to cover. The dashboard pulsed green. Michael studied it, brow furrowed. "You're solving 2 problems at once, efficiency and humanity." "That's the hope," I said. "I've lived on the wrong side of both." For a moment, the hum of the plane was the only sound. Then, without warning, Richard stood to use the restroom, brushing past our row. He hesitated when he saw the laptop, his eyes darting from the screen to Michael's face, then to mine. Your heart?" His voice cracked. Michael didn't answer. He just gave a small nod, as if the question were unworthy of elaboration. Richard swallowed hard, muttered something, and hurried down the aisle. Patricia's head sank lower, shoulders drawn tight. Michael turned back to me, unfazed. "Daniel, when this flight lands, don't waste energy proving them wrong. Spend it proving yourself right." The words struck deeper than any turbulence. For years, I had carried shame like extra baggage. Maybe it was time to set it down. As the cabin lights dimmed for the long stretch west, I closed my laptop and leaned against the cool glass of the window. Below, the country stretched endless and quiet. Inside, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Steady, certain, unshaken. The captain's voice broke through the soft hum of engines. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into San Francisco. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Clouds peeled away to reveal the bay, silver and restless under the afternoon sun. The Golden Gate glowed in the distance, a ribbon of orange strung across blue. My chest tightened. San Francisco wasn't just a city, it was a test. Michael closed his folder, sliding it into the seatback pocket. "Nervous?" he asked, reading me without effort. "Not about the meeting," I admitted. "About what comes after." He nodded, as if he understood the unspoken weight of family ties. "The hardest rooms aren't boardrooms," he said. "They're dining rooms." Ahead of us, Patricia whispered sharply to Richard. He didn't answer. His face was pale, lips pressed thin, eyes locked on the floor. The swagger was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: caution. The plane dipped, wheels dropping with a thud. My wife leaned back, her hand reaching behind her seat, just far enough to brush mine. The touch was brief, hidden, but it told me everything. She had seen what happened, and she was proud. As the plane touched down, tires screeching against asphalt, I felt the vibration surge through me like a second heartbeat. For once, the landing wasn't just for the plane, it was for me. We taxied toward the gate. Michael checked his watch, then turned. "You have 20 minutes with me," he said. "Use them well, but remember, your value isn't measured by who doubts you." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. Passengers stood, crowding the aisle, reaching for bags. Patricia and Richard remained seated longer than usual. When they finally rose, Patricia avoided my gaze, clutching her handbag like a shield. Richard muttered, "We'll see you outside," then shuffled forward. The aisle narrowed with motion, but Michael gestured for me to go ahead. As we stepped into the jet bridge, cool air rushed over us, smelling faintly of metal and oil. My in-laws were only a few paces ahead, stiff, silent, diminished. And then something unexpected happened. My wife slowed, let them walk on, and fell in step with me. Her hand slipped into mine, openly this time. "You didn't say a word," she whispered. "And yet, you said everything." I squeezed her hand. For the first time, Richard and Patricia weren't the center of the stage. We were. Michael cleared his throat gently. "Cafe in 30 minutes, Daniel. Don't be late." And just like that, the gate opened into San Francisco. Sunlight streaming through glass walls. The city waiting beyond. The flight was over. The real journey was about to begin. San Francisco greeted us with its usual contradiction: the sharp chill of the bay wind and the golden promise of sunlight spilling over glass towers. I checked my watch. 28 minutes until Michael's invitation turned into silence. We left the terminal together, but Richard and Patricia veered toward baggage claim without a word. My wife lingered. "Go," she whispered. "This is yours. I'll meet you later." Her eyes held steady, no longer apologizing for me. The cafe Michael had written on the card sat in Soma, a corner spot with tall windows and the aroma of roasted beans spilling into the street. I pushed the door open, nerves tangled in my stomach, and found him already there. No entourage, no security, just a man in a dark suit stirring his coffee. "Sit," he said simply. I opened my laptop, the same screen I'd shown on the plane glowing against the cafe's warm light. I walked him through real-time crew balancing, weather overlays, and recovery strategy. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke, the way it always did when I entered the world I had built. Michael leaned in, asking questions sharp and fast. "What's the cost curve if scale triples? How do you validate fatigue probabilities against actual performance? What protects this from copycats?" I answered each one, not perfectly, but honestly. We can't outspend competition, but we can outcare them. Most scheduling software treats people like chess pieces. This one treats them like humans. His eyes flickered, the way they had on the plane. Respect, not charity. Finally, he set down his cup. "I'll be blunt, Daniel. Atlas doesn't buy prototypes. We buy people. And what I see is someone who knows where pain lives in this industry." I held my breath. "I can't promise you the world," he continued, "but I can promise you a pilot program. 3 months, 3 airports. Prove this works under fire, and we'll talk equity, not charity." The words hit harder than turbulent. I wanted to shout, to run back into the street and call everyone I knew. But instead, I simply nodded. "Deal." Michael extended his hand again, firm and steady. "Don't waste this, and don't let anyone, especially family, convince you that Route 28 defines your altitude." I smiled for the first time that day, not forced, but full. The city outside the cafe pulsed with late afternoon energy. Buses groaned, cyclists weaved, horns blared in quick bursts of impatience. But inside, time slowed around that handshake. For years, I had dreamed of being heard. Now, in the quiet corner of Soma, I finally was. Michael left with the swiftness of a man whose minutes cost more than most people's days. He didn't promise friendship or flattery. He promised a chance, and that was worth more. I closed my laptop slowly, hands trembling, not from fear but from release. When I stepped back onto the street, the wind hit colder, sharper, yet I felt lighter. My wife waited near the curb, suitcase at her side. Her smile was small, almost private, but it spoke of pride she no longer had to hide. "What happened?" she asked. "We're not in row 28 anymore," I said, and she understood. At baggage claim, Richard and Patricia stood stiff near the carousel. Their voices were low now, stripped of the usual edge. When Richard finally spoke, it was flat, almost cautious. "Rough flight, huh?" I met his eyes, not with anger, but with clarity. "No. Best flight of my life." Then I walked past them, my wife's hand in mine, our luggage rattling behind us like punctuation to a sentence I was finally ready to end. Outside, taxis lined the curb, neon reflections dancing on their hoods. The city stretched upward, indifferent to me, but no longer intimidating. For the first time, I felt aligned with its rhythm, like one more current in its restless tide. As we rode away, I thought of all the nights I had doubted myself, of every whispered joke, every dismissive laugh. I realized they hadn't been chains, they had been weights, training me to hold steady when turbulence hit. Row 28 was never about humiliation, it was preparation. And now, with a pilot program ahead, with a woman beside me who believed when others mocked, with a handshake that still echoed in my palm, I knew the truth. Success isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right.